Welcome back to Chains of Addiction. My name is Max. Today, a good friend of mine asked me to maybe make a video for him. He's looking to buy a saw, and the type of saw really isn't important. The question that he asked me to make a video on was, what do I look for when I go to buy a used saw? So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to pull a saw out of my back storage that I haven't really messed with very much, it's been quite a while anyway. I do know that it ran, but it ran poorly. That's not the point. I'm gonna pull it out and we'll take it out in the shop and go over some of the things that you should look for when you're buying a used saw. All right? Okay, so Sambo, this video is for you. Yes, I know that you're not looking at a steel MS390, but good news for you, this isn't actually an MS390, nor does it really matter, because the stuff that I'm going to talk about here today applies to basically any used chainsaw, okay? So one of the first things that I want to talk about is when you contact the seller of a used chainsaw, if you're doing it say online on Facebook or Craigslist or whatever. When you set up a time to go and meet them, ask them. Don't be shy. You're the one that's buying their product. Ask them if they would make sure that it's not been run recently when you come to see it. Now what that does is it allows you to see whether or not the saw will start cold, right? So a chainsaw should start cold, hasn't been run in a few hours. If you put it on choke, and most of them are going to be a high idle, and pull it over a few times, you should hear it pop after the third or fourth or fifth pull. If it doesn't, that's an immediate indicator that either something is wrong with the saw, or whoever had it and was running it last had it tuned not well. So that's the reason that you do that. You do want to obviously start it if you're buying a running saw, but you want it to be cold when you get there. Next thing that you want to look at is the chain. Start with the simple stuff, okay? This chain, now some of these teeth I was practicing my square grind on. So if you look back here, these are nice and sharp-ish. But these teeth, they are very, very dull, right? So what that tells you is something about, again, whoever was running the saw last. Generally, you're going to find a lot of people that run dull chains. But the question is, how far will they let it go? Now, if it is super dull, like this one was super dull when we got it, that means that they probably are not taking real good care of their saw. Cutting with a dull chain is super hard on the motor. So that's a big red flag there. But it doesn't necessarily disqualify the saw from being something that you want to pick up. Just keep it in the file for, your pros and cons list later when you're trying to actually make a decision, okay? So look at the chain and also look at the bar, okay? This bar is very worn. It's missing almost all of the paint up here, which tells me a couple of things. It's probably been run super hot, so maybe they didn't clean out the oiler hole or ran it out of oil a few times. And there's discoloring in the paint up near the tip. Again, got super hot. One thing that is, a lot of times there will be a lip right on the bar rail. This one does not so much have a, well, I guess, yeah, it does. It does right here. It has a lip. So that means, again, they were running it hot and probably without proper oiling. So if you're noticing a theme here, we're looking at the simplest stuff first, right? The stuff that you can see obviously from the outside. And along that vein, I want to look at the stickers on the saw. Now, this saw has all the original warning stickers on it, which is great. But one thing that I noticed right off the bat is that the nameplate or the label on the recoil seems like it's very faded, whereas most of the other stickers seem like they're not. Okay? That makes me think that maybe this part of the saw is not original to this saw, or the other parts of the saw came from a parts saw. Now, one last thing on the outside here. Obviously, when you're doing all this, look, see if the chain brake handle is broken, any of that stuff. But you want to look at the front of the saw, okay? This area with the muffler and the front of the crankcase, if this is real beat up, which this one is not, but if this is real beat up, that means that somebody has been jamming this thing into logs or trees, and that means that saw has probably been run hard. Almost every logging saw looks like that, and if you're buying a homeowner saw and it looks like that, that's probably not a good thing. So again, not necessarily a complete disqualifier, but something to think about. Now, diving in a little deeper, gotta check the air filter, okay? On this saw, it's really easy. You pop off that cover. This air filter, this is one of those flocked air filters, so it looks dirty even when it's not dirty. This one's almost perfectly clean, which is actually odd in the case of this saw, because most of the saw, everything underneath the clutch cover, is super dirty. So that makes me think that somebody did a tune-up on it. Maybe it wasn't running, I don't know, but it is a little bit odd. You want to see kind of uniform maintenance, whether it's good or bad. When you see, things that are out of place, it kind of makes you think that maybe something funky was going on. So this is a little bit odd, but look at the air filter, see if it's clean. If it's all clogged up with sawdust, again, that's an indicator that maybe the guy that was running this before wasn't really taking very good care of his saw. That's really all you need to look at there. I do on the steels and some of the other saws, I usually look at the choker, any plastic linkage just under here. On these steels, this rod has a tendency to break, or the bracket that it goes into. But again, general stuff here. So you can put that back on. By this point, we have some sort of idea of what kind of person ran the saw before. But we really want to know, a chainsaw is basically a motor attached to a chain, right? So we want to know the condition of the motor. And there is one simple way to do that without running it. You'll have to ask whoever's selling it. And seriously, don't be afraid to ask. If they say no, tell them that you'll buy it if you break it. If we take the muffler off, we can see straight into the exhaust port. And that will give us a picture of both the piston and one part of the cylinder wall. One part of the piston, one part of the cylinder wall. So that's what we're going to do. This particular muffler, I've never actually had one of these off, so I might have to scrounge for a tool. It is nice when you go to buy a saw, if you're gonna do something like this, take tools with you. You can look up online what tools are necessary to take off a muffler. It's not that big a deal. This one looks like it probably requires, I'm gonna say that's about a 8mm socket. Probably metric, should be metric because it's a steel. So I'm gonna scrounge around and find an 8mm socket, and then we'll get back to this. This is a, supposedly, if you look at the side cover, this is a steel MS390. I'm actually fairly certain that it's a 290 with a 390 side cover. I haven't really dove that deep into it because I have zero money into this saw. It doesn't run, but I mean, it runs, but really poorly. Which is actually why I picked it for this video, because I feel like this is going to be very instructive, taking this muffler off and looking inside the port, but we'll find out soon. And if you are doing this on somebody else's saw, try not to lose any of the parts. That'd be good. Now, one thing to note here is that when I took this redirect off of the muffler, there's these two little ports here. There should be a screen in there, right? There should be a spark arrestor screen in between there. It doesn't exist. So somebody's had this off before for sure. Again, that's something that I do to some of my saws because those spark arrestor screens get clogged up really bad. And I ain't never seen a spark come out of a chainsaw muffler. So, but something to think about. So now I'm looking at this muffler and looking inside of this muffler, inside just right in the opening, there's a bunch of carbon buildup right there. Somebody's probably been running this thing pretty rich at one point, or with poor quality mix oil. It's the same story on the exhaust port itself. See that bottom side? See all that carbon buildup? That's not something that you really want to see. I mean, you'll see some in almost every saw, but you don't want to see big deposits like that. So there is that. Now most saws will have a muffler gasket, and also they'll have usually a piece of stainless steel that's like a heat shield or heat spreader. This one doesn't have a heat spreader. I'm fairly certain that it would have had one stock, so somebody has had this muffler off before for sure. Now I'm gonna look down in there and see what I can see, and then we'll try and get the camera to look down in there as well. Yep. That's what we're looking at. Try and get it more centered on the screen, because it'll focus better. See? That line, that's what we're looking at. Yeah, that, and then I'm going to pull this up. Yeah. Okay. So I think, even on video, which is hard to get, I think that it was fairly obvious what we were looking at there. There's some pretty serious scoring, and with my head rather than the camera, I can actually get to an angle where I can see more scoring, both on the piston and the cylinder wall. So now something to note about that is that sometimes the fuel oil mix moving on the cylinder wall and on the piston can look like scoring. So to the naked eye it's fairly obvious, but if you get a flashlight in there it can look like scoring. So be careful. A lot of times it pays to, swipe a finger or even a cotton swab or something in there to see whether it's wet or if it's actual scoring. A little bit of light scoring is totally normal, but there's some pretty serious, definite and deep grooves in this cylinder wall. Now, that makes perfect sense to me because I know this saw and it acted like it had almost no compression. So, makes sense. But if you see deep scoring in a saw that you're looking to buy and you intend to use it, probably not the saw for you. What I am going to do is I'm going to pull this rope. Okay? Now, I don't have the compression release on. Oh, but I do have the spark plug out. Give me a minute. So the compression release is not open. So it should have compression, right? It has some, but not as much as I would like to feel, for sure. I could probably pull that over with my pinky if I could hold the thing. It really, or 2 fingers. It's not got a whole lot, okay? If I were looking to buy a saw, I would turn this one away right now. I probably would have turned it away after having looked at the bar and chain and the mismatched side cover, just because it's throwing some real weird vibes. But especially after looking in at that cylinder, this thing has been ridden hard and put away wet. So this is not a good saw to buy. But assuming that you look in there, you don't see anything out of the ordinary, the next step is to actually start it and run it. Now, it's 9:30. I don't really want to piss off the neighbors, so I'm not going to do that part of the video right now. But basically what you're looking for when you go to start it, like I said before, put it on full choke. If it's got a throttle lock it. If it's got a primer bulb, prime it. And you should pull it. One would be amazing and probably means that the carb is adjusted too rich. But anywhere from 1 to, say, 5 times if the saw has been run in the last few weeks. If it hasn't been run in the last few weeks, it might take a few more pulls than that to get fuel up to the carburetor. But anyway, within, say, 5 pulls, you should get a pop, or, you know, it should act like it's going to start, and then when you pop it off of full choke onto half choke or high idle or whatever the setting may be on that particular saw, it should only take 1 or 2 more pulls for the thing to start up and run. If it doesn't, that means that probably something is wrong either with the tuning of the carburetor, which is probably, again, an indicator that the previous owner of the saw didn't really know his saws very well, or there could be something wrong internally with the saw. And a big thing is, don't just start the saw, run it for a minute, and shut it off and say, here's your money. Start the saw, run it for a minute, don't rev it, let the thing warm up, and tell the guy that that's what you're doing. I'm letting the saw warm up before I run it very much. If he looks at you funny, again, strong indicator, maybe this isn't the guy you want to be buying a saw from. But if he doesn't, just set the thing down. Set it on the ground, set it on a table, whatever. Let it run for 5 minutes. Listen to it. See how it's running. See if it's doing any weird popping or anything. See if it idles up or idles down. You want a smooth running saw. Like, that's the goal. And a lot of that could be, again, tuning. But hopefully, if you're buying a saw to go cut with, it should be fairly right? And then, once it's run for a while and warmed up, then play with the throttle. See how it revs out. See if it chokes on itself when you try to give it throttle. After that, I mean, most of the time you're not going to have an opportunity to cut with a saw when you go to buy it. It happens very rarely. That should give you a fairly good idea of what to look for in a used saw. Another thing to note is that I always open up both the gas tank and the oil tank. I want to smell man. Like, you can smell, especially this new modern fuel, you can smell when it's gone bad, and it doesn't take all that long. And with chainsaws specifically, they don't like ethanol fuel. And most people, even if they don't know it, they can smell the difference. So if you open up the fuel tank and it's got ethanol fuel in it, if it were me, I'd just walk away right now. It does horrible things to all of the hoses and the gaskets and the seals inside of the saw. They're not designed for ethanol fuel. Also, open up the bar oil, right? If you look in there and it's bone dry, but it had half a tank of gas, here's your sign, buddy. This guy doesn't know what he's doing with the saw, and he's probably damaged it, right? He's probably damaged the oil pump or damaged the bar. I'd just walk away from that saw. Barring all of that stuff, and the saw runs, you know, it's always, buying anything used is a little bit of a gamble, but that should get you at least in the ballpark of not buying a lemon. And that's the whole concept, right? You don't want to buy a saw, take it home, go to cut with it for 5 minutes, and then the motor's shot, or you find out that the bar is going to fall off. I don't actually usually bother to take the clutch cover off when I'm looking at a saw to buy. There's very rarely anything under there that's going to surprise me too much, so I don't really bother with it. But when you are running that saw, that's one other thing that I forgot to mention. When you're running that saw, see if it's oiling. It should be really obvious. If you rev it a little bit and then you look at the chain, you should see wet on the chain. If you don't, lift the chain out of the bar. If the drivers down there are dry, that thing's not oiling. And if it's got bar oil in it and you're revving it and it's not oiling, either there's a massive clog in the oiling system or the oil pump is fried. And on a lot of saws, that can be a major deal breaker. So check to see if it's oiling. Anyway, I think that's it for today, guys. Thanks for coming by. Hopefully this helps Sambo, for one. Go buy that little saw. Well, go check it out anyway. And if you like what you saw here today, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel, and we'll see you next time.